Hi everyone, I'm Jess from Minerva, here today to share with you a sew-along tutorial for the Simplicity pattern 8715 that will help you make this adorable little stuffed dragon toy. There will be some information for if you are new to sewing or using commercial patterns, as well as the step-by-step tutorial itself. You can save this video to refer back to at a later date, as well as always, find all of the products and materials I've mentioned linked below for your convenience. I recommend watching this video all the way through to familiarise yourself with the steps, and at the end there will be a couple of tips and tricks that I used along the way and some other ideas to help you get your own creativity going. Let's start with looking at the packet. As you can see, the pattern comes with 3 standard variations. Version A is just the basic two-tone dragon body. B is the same body design with the addition of a firm mane and tail tuft, and C is the same body again but with wings and spine spikes. For this video I will be making variation C, but we'll go over the different stages for the other versions as we go along. Turning the packet over, you'll find the suggested fabrics list, which I'll talk about more shortly, and the materials list for each of the pattern variations, as well as the yardage for each of the fabrics. Each toy requires about 6 ounces stuffing, a pair of safety toy eyes, and obviously thread. So let's talk about the fabric suggested for this project, which is minky fleece. Originally I thought minky only referred to this type of fabric, but after some research I found that minky refers to 100% polyester super soft plush fabric with either dimpled or fuzzy textures. Minky is also resistant to pilling, which makes it safer to use for children's toys in case they start chewing on the toy's leg. I wanted to see how the toy would turn out with a slightly different fleece, so I'll be using polar fleece, which behaves the same as minky. It's just as soft but slightly less fluffy. I will be making a blue two-tone dragon. The lighter colour is called Hyacinth, and I'll be using that for the body, legs and the top of the wings. And the dark colour is a navy, which I'll be using for the tummy, spikes, horns and the underside of the wings. For the stuffing, I'll be using this Habico multi-purpose filling. I ended up using about 1/4 of the bag per dragon. We will also need to give our dragon friend some eyes. I will be using this 1.5 centimeter Craft Factory toy safety eyes. These come with a safety washer, which once pressed into the back of the eye through the fabric will not come off again, thus making them safe for children. To go with the eyes, the instructions call for interfacing around the eye area to stop the fabric pulling through. And lastly, thread. Once you've chosen your fabric, our site has a great feature that will automatically add matching thread to your basket to match the chosen fabric to save you the time for trying to hunt for it yourself. I will be using this light blue Gutermann thread that matches the main body of my dragon. Now that we've got everything together, let's get started. When you open up the packet, you'll find the thin pattern sheets and the instructions. Let's look at these first. They come with an illustrated key to understand the different icons used throughout the instructions themselves, and a cutting layout guide for each of the variations. These layouts are just a suggestion. If you are pattern matching with a particular fabric, you may need to position the pieces differently. Just remember to take into account the grain line for each of the pattern pieces. Moving on to the pattern sheets themselves, these can be ironed on a low heat to get the creases out, which makes them a little bit easier to cut. You want to find the pieces you need for the variation you're making and cut them out. Now with all our pattern pieces cut out, you can see that each one says how many of which particular fabric you'll need to cut out. To start off with, I'm going to transfer all the position markers and dots from the template piece to the material using a fabric marker. Whichever version you are making, firstly we need to prep the eye area. To start with, cut 2 2.5 centimeter circles of fusible interfacing. Iron these onto the wrong side of the fabric. When ironing, make sure you have a piece of scrap cotton to hand to protect your fabric and prevent the interfacing melting onto your iron plate. We will be sewing the head together before attaching the eyes themselves. If you are making version A, pin and sew all the way along the center seam, matching the small dot and the large dots. If you are making version B, pin and sew along the center seam between the small dots. Then insert the head mane, his fluffy fringe, between the two pieces of the upper head and sew around the outside. If you are making version C, like me, we need to make the head spikes first so they can be sandwiched in between this seam. Make all 5 small spikes and the 3 large spikes by matching up the dots on both sides and sewing around the edge. Trim and notch the seam if needed. Line up 2 of the small spikes on one of the upper head pieces on the right side of the fabric and hand baste into place. Then pin the 2 head sections together and sew the centre seam up. With the upper head together, now we need to attach the lower head sections. Once sewn, trim and notch the seam. You should end up with a hole at the back of the head. Now we can attach the eyes. We need a sharp pointed object to poke a hole at the small marker dot. Insert the eye shank from the outside and secure with the washer on the inside, pressing until it is secure. Next, it's time to stuff the head. And then we need to close up the back of the head with a ladder stitch. And now it's time to make the horns. Pin the 2 horn sections together and sew around the outside. Make sure you know which is the left and which is the right. If you keep them this way round, you won't get them muddled up. This becomes important for the next stage, which is to clip a small hole at the base of the horn so you can turn them inside out and then stuff firmly. Pin the made horns to the head, matching up the dots. And then you want to ladder stitch the horns in place on either side of the head. And that's the head finished. How cute is he? And now we can start the body. Again, start with transferring all of the markers for the variation that you're making onto the material using fabric marker. Carefully cut out the small semicircle shapes at the leg join points. Pin the front inner leg and the back inner leg to the body with the right sides together. Stitch around the semicircle cutouts. Trim to decrease the bulk around the seam if necessary. Push the legs through the opening hole. And then, with right sides together, pin the other leg pieces, which are 4 and 6, to their corresponding leg and sew around the outside. Trim and notch the seam. Do the same for the other side of the body so you now have 2 completed halves that are ready to be joined together. If you are making variation A, pin and sew between the large markers which go from the top of the neck to the underside of the tail. If you are making version B, pin the body sections together and sew from the small dot to the large dot, which is at the bottom end of the tail. Then take your body main piece and attach it in the gap with the centre seam as you would have done for the head piece. Make sure you backstitch at both ends to reinforce the join. If you are making version C, you'll need to make the wings before we can sew the body together. Start with matching the 2 wing pieces, which are number 16, with right sides together and sew around the outside. Only trim the scalloped edge of the wing, notching the seam if needed. Then, either by hand or using a machine, stitch along the stitching lines to make the wing pattern. Make sure you match your pieces up correctly so that you have the contrast colour on the underside of the wing. To attach the wings, pin them to the body section matching the large and small dots and then hand baste them into place. Finally, before joining the body pieces together, line up and hand baste the remaining spine spikes into place, and then pin and sew the body sections together between the large dots. For all versions, we're now going to attach the tummy piece. Pin and sew all along the outside, making sure that you backstitch to reinforce the joins. And lastly, press under all the way around the neck edge by 6 mm. Now with the body finished, we need to turn it the right way out. And then is ready to stuff. To get the stuffing down to the tail and into the legs, you might need a small poking device like a chopstick or the smooth end of a pencil. Do this in little bits at a time if needed, so you don't put too much tension on the stitching at the join points. This can be fiddly, but just take your time with it. To attach the head, line it up with the centres matching and ladder stitch all the way around. You can either finish your dragon here or add a tail spike. There are 2 ways in which you can do this. Pin the tail spike sections together, which for this are number 10, and sew around the outside, leaving a small opening on the inner edge for turning. Trim and notch the edge if needed. Turn the spike inside out and slightly stuff. Then close the opening with a ladder stitch. Finally, pin and ladder stitch on the underside to attach the spike to the end of the tail. And there you have it, an adorable dragon friend to cuddle up with. The materials that we're using, so that's the fleeces, do like to move about a lot when you've got layers together as you're sewing them through the machine. To reduce this level of movement, you can hand baste longer stitches right around the edge of your pattern pieces when you've got them together before you machine stitch them along the seam allowance. This will help reduce the level of movement together and keep your pieces together so you don't pull one layer out of position. When I'm working with the pattern, I always like to see how I can push it further or add my own flair to it. To that end, I made this little guy. One of the pictures on the packet has the dragon sitting on the model shoulders, and that instantly made me think how well it would work as a heat pack for any neck aches as well as tummy aches, because he can sit across your tummy due to his archedness. So I put a zip in between the tummy and body parts. I didn't stuff in the middle, instead there's a removable heat pack which I made from an old sock, which you can take out, put in the microwave, put back in, zip up carefully, and now he can sit on your shoulders and he's super snuggly. I hope this video has helped you with putting this little guy together, as well as improved your confidence with sewing or patterns if you are new to using them. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And if you haven't already, why not create a free account with Minerva to share your creations with our wonderful sewing community. Thank you for watching, and be sure to come back regularly for more sewing inspiration.